Imagine you're a chief executive officer today. It's Tuesday morning. 1 minute, you're deep in strategic planning, wrestling with supply chain logistics, disrupted by geopolitical tensions. The next minute, your Slack channels are exploding because employees are demanding the company take a public stand on a deeply divisive social issue they feel passionately about. Simultaneously, a major investor group sends a pointed email scrutinizing your latest environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, scores, hinting that future funding might depend on hitting certain metrics. And just as you think you can grab a coffee, your communications lead rushes in. A minor customer complaint, seemingly insignificant yesterday, has gone viral overnight, fueled by outrage on social media, and the narrative is spinning wildly out of control. Does running a business today feel less like steering a ship and more like navigating a political minefield every single day? Does the ground beneath your feet feel constantly shifting, making every decision fraught with potential backlash from somewhere? You're not alone. The pressure is immense, and the old rules simply don't seem to apply anymore. There's a constant buzz around terms like ESG, stakeholder capitalism, corporate purpose, but what do they really mean in practice? How do you lead effectively when the landscape is this complex and polarized? Welcome to CEO's Library, the 1% Bookshelf, the podcast that distills the world's most impactful business and personal development books into actionable insights for leaders like you. I'm your guide on this journey, and today we're diving headfirst into a book that cuts through the noise and offers a vital new perspective, Higher Ground: How Business Can Do the Right Thing in a Turbulent World by Alison Taylor. Now, this isn't just another idealistic treatise on business ethics filled with platitudes. Alison Taylor, drawing on decades of experience advising global companies as a consultant and now as a clinical associate professor at NYU Stern School of Business, delivers a refreshingly pragmatic and deeply insightful guide for navigating the messy reality of modern leadership. In this episode, we'll unpack why the traditional approaches to corporate responsibility are falling short, often dangerously so. We'll expose the hidden traps lurking within popular strategies like chasing ESG scores and vaguely promising to serve all stakeholders. Most importantly, we'll reveal Alison Taylor's powerful core argument that the most reliable compass for ethical decision-making in this turbulent world is a relentless focus on your company's actual impact on human beings and the environment. By the end of our 30 minutes together, you won't just understand the challenges better, you'll walk away with a clearer framework for building genuine trust, setting meaningful priorities, and leading your organization towards authentically higher ground. Let's get started. Remember Milton Friedman's famous doctrine from 1970? He declared, quite unequivocally, the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. For decades, that principle offered a clear, albeit narrow, focus for corporate leaders: maximize shareholder value, follow the law, and the rest would largely take care of itself. But let's be honest, reading that statement today feels quaint, almost dangerously simplistic in the face of 21st century realities. Why does that once dominant ideology feel so utterly inadequate now? What seismic shifts have occurred to transform the relatively stable, contained world of business operations into the hyper-transparent, intensely politicized, high-pressure battlefield leaders face today? Alison Taylor, in Higher Ground, argues compellingly that it wasn't one single event, but a powerful confluence of forces that fundamentally dismantled the old model and reshaped the landscape. First, and perhaps most profoundly, is the advent of radical transparency. Think about it. The smartphone in nearly every pocket, combined with the instantaneous global reach of social media, means that practically anything a company does, says, or even tolerates internally can become public knowledge in minutes. Secrets are virtually impossible to keep. Narratives can spiral out of control before you even understand what's happening. Remember the video of the passenger being dragged off a United Airlines flight, or the leaked documents, like those from WikiLeaks exposing corporate practices at firms like Trafigura. These incidents demonstrate that the walls protecting internal corporate life have crumbled. What happens in the supply chain, in the boardroom, even in internal emails, is potentially tomorrow's viral headline. Second, we've witnessed a dramatic politicization of business and, conversely, the growing influence of business in politics, as governments in many parts of the world seem increasingly gridlocked or fail to address pressing societal problems. Stakeholders, particularly employees and consumers, are turning to corporations, expecting them to step into the void. Think about the corporate responses, or lack thereof, to major social movements. The pressure on companies to take stands on issues like racial justice following the murder of George Floyd was immense, a stark contrast to the relative corporate silence around earlier events like Ferguson. Simultaneously, corporate lobbying and political spending have blurred the lines, leading to perceptions that companies are shaping the rules of the game to their advantage. In this environment, claiming neutrality is often seen not as prudent, but as complicit. The very act of doing business is now inherently political. Third, the nature of corporate value itself has shifted. Increasingly, a company's worth is tied up not just in its physical assets or financial performance, but in intangible factors: reputation, brand loyalty, stakeholder trust, employee morale. These intangibles are incredibly powerful, but also incredibly vulnerable. An ethical lapse, a perceived betrayal of values, or a mishandling of a crisis can evaporate billions in market capitalization and destroy decades of goodwill almost overnight. Managing these ethical and reputational risks has become paramount. And finally, Taylor highlights the rise of employee activism, empowered by the same transparency that exposes companies externally and driven by shifting generational values. Think of the expectations of Gen Z entering the workforce. Employees are increasingly challenging their leaders from within. They expect their employers' actions to align with stated values. We've seen this play out in walkouts at major tech companies like Google over ethical concerns related to projects or workplace policies, or employees pressuring companies like Wayfair regarding contracts supplying government agencies. Leaders are no longer just managing external perceptions, they are increasingly accountable to their own workforce's moral compass. So what does this radically new environment mean for you as a leader? It means fundamentally recognizing that the old boundaries are gone. Your company operates in a glass house, in a hyper-politicized arena where trust is fragile and stakeholders are empowered. The actionable takeaway here is stark but necessary. Conduct what you might call a transparency audit in your mind. Assume that any internal email, any decision made in a closed-door meeting, any data point about your operations could become public tomorrow. How does that potential exposure change your approach? Does it force a harder look at whether your internal culture and practices truly align with your public statements and brand promises? Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? Because in today's world, it's not a matter of if something might leak, but when. Okay, so we've established the old Friedman doctrine is dead and buried, a relic of a bygone era. The operating environment is undeniably more complex, transparent, and demanding. Naturally, new frameworks have emerged, promising to guide leaders through this minefield. The two dominant buzzwords we hear constantly are ESG, environmental, social, and governance, and stakeholder capitalism. Invest in ESG, we're told. Get good ratings from MSCI or Sustainalytics. Embrace stakeholder capitalism. Balance the needs of employees customers, suppliers, communities, and shareholders. Find those elusive win-win solutions, where doing good is also good for the bottom line. It all sounds incredibly reasonable, progressive even. Who wouldn't want to do well by doing good? But here's where Alison Taylor throws up a crucial warning flag in Higher Ground. She argues, based on her extensive experience, that these popular paths, while often well-intentioned, are riddled with dangerous traps that can actually lead businesses further away from genuine ethical conduct and sustainable practices. Why do these seemingly positive frameworks often lead us astray? Let's dissect the common pitfalls Taylor identifies. First, the core idea of balancing stakeholder interests sounds collaborative and fair, but in practice, it's incredibly vague. Who exactly counts as a stakeholder? Employees? Yes. Customers? Certainly. Shareholders? Obviously. But what about suppliers, local communities, future generations, activist groups? And crucially, when the interests of these diverse groups inevitably conflict, which they often do, how do you decide whose interests prevail? The framework offers little practical guidance for making these tough trade-offs. It can lead to paralysis, trying to please everyone and satisfying no one. Worse, Taylor points out, it often frames stakeholders implicitly as adversarial groups whose demands need to be managed or neutralized rather than as partners in value creation or groups impacted by the business. Second, let's talk about ESG scores. The proliferation of ESG ratings agencies and investment funds suggests that we can neatly quantify and compare corporate goodness. But Taylor warns, fixating on these scores is often a dangerous distraction. Chasing ratings incentivizes box-ticking and impression management rather than driving genuine, positive impact. Companies learn to play the ratings game, focusing on disclosures and policies that look good on paper, but might not translate into meaningful change on the ground. The metrics themselves are notoriously inconsistent across different ratings agencies, making comparisons difficult. Furthermore, ESG reporting often focuses on a company's own operational footprint, what's called Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. For instance, while potentially ignoring the much larger impacts embedded in their value chains or the use of their products' Scope 3. Think of the irony, as Taylor and others like Kenneth Pucker have pointed out, of ESG funds holding significant investments in companies operating in authoritarian regimes or fossil fuel giants right up until a crisis hits. ESG frameworks can also misleadingly suggest that sustainability and ethics are somehow separate streams of work, rather than deeply intertwined. Simply put, a good ESG score doesn't automatically equate to ethical behavior or positive real-world impact. Third, Taylor challenges the pervasive win-win myth, the comforting idea that ethical actions and sustainable practices always align with short-term financial profitability. While sometimes they do, the reality is far more complex. Making genuinely ethical choices often involves significant upfront costs, investments with uncertain long-term payoffs, and difficult trade-offs that might negatively impact the bottom line in the immediate term. Pretending that every responsible action is a straightforward business case prevents honest conversations about these real costs and complexities. It can lead companies to only pursue superficial initiatives with clear PR benefits, while avoiding the harder, more costly changes that might be necessary. And finally, relying solely on compliance, simply following the letter of the law, is woefully inadequate in today's world. Laws often lag significantly behind emerging ethical challenges, especially in areas like technology or environmental science. Regulations vary dramatically across different countries, creating opportunities for companies to engage in jurisdictional arbitrage by moving problematic activities to places with weaker oversight. Furthermore, as Taylor notes, Particularly in areas like anti-corruption, powerful corporate lobbying efforts have often succeeded in weakening regulations or carving out loopholes. Staying within legal boundaries is the bare minimum. It is not a substitute for a robust ethical framework. So, what's the actionable takeaway from this critique? Stop chasing vague ideals like balancing all stakeholders or fixating solely on improving your ESG score. These can be misleading metrics of true progress. Instead, Taylor urges a shift in focus. Ask yourself, what are the most significant impacts, both positive and negative, that our core business activities actually have on key groups of people and the environment? Start your analysis there, focusing on substantive issues rather than reporting frameworks, and critically evaluate your current ESG efforts. Are they genuinely integrated into your core business strategy and decision-making processes, or are they primarily siloed in a sustainability department focused on reporting and public relations? Are you, as a leadership team, prepared to make investments in ethical conduct and sustainability, even when the immediate return on investment isn't clear or guaranteed? Moving beyond the buzzwords requires this kind of critical self-assessment. If legal compliance is just the floor, not the ceiling, if ESG scores can be a misleading distraction, and if trying to vaguely balance the often conflicting demands of countless stakeholders feels like navigating a dense fog without a map, where then do leaders find a reliable compass? How do we make principled decisions about which ethical issues to prioritize and how to act upon them amidst the noise and pressure? Alison Taylor argues in Higher Ground that the answer is fundamentally about shifting our perspective. Instead of getting lost in abstract frameworks or reactive crisis management, she proposes grounding our ethical commitments in something far more tangible and universal: the actual impact our business has on human beings. This is the core reorientation Taylor advocates. Move away from a defensive posture, focused primarily on protecting the corporate principle, the company itself, from risk. Instead, adopt an outward-looking perspective focused on understanding and managing the real-world effects, the externalities generated by your business operations, products, and services. The fundamental question becomes, how does our business, in its day-to-day activities, affect people's lives? Does it enhance or diminish their agency, their ability to make choices for themselves? Does it uphold or undermine their dignity and right to be treated with respect? Does it impact their health, their safety, their economic well-being, their fundamental human rights? By centering on human impact, Taylor implicitly draws on the universal framework of human rights. This provides a powerful, non-ideological foundation for ethical decision-making. It's not about imposing your company's specific values or wading into every contentious socio-political debate. Rather, it's about anchoring your responsibilities in widely accepted, universal principles of human dignity and well-being. This focus naturally connects seemingly disparate issues. For example, environmental degradation isn't just an ecological problem, it's a human rights issue impacting the right to health, clean water, and a stable environment, particularly for vulnerable communities. Labor conditions in the supply chain aren't just an operational detail, they're about the rights and dignity of workers. Data privacy isn't just a technical issue, it's about respecting individual autonomy and agency. Crucially, Taylor emphasizes prioritizing the principle of do no harm before launching ambitious initiatives to save the world or engaging in philanthropic activities that are tangential to the core business, which can sometimes look like impact washing. The first and most critical step is to rigorously identify, understand, and mitigate the negative impacts generated by your company's own operations and value chain. Addressing the harm your business might cause, whether it's pollution, unsafe working conditions, misleading marketing, or products with harmful side effects, builds a necessary foundation of credibility. Without this, grander claims of corporate purpose ring hollow. Furthermore, Taylor points out that these negative human impacts are often the root cause of the very risks that companies spend so much time trying to manage reactively: reputational damage, lawsuits, regulatory scrutiny, employee dissent, loss of social license to operate. These risks might seem unpredictable, popping up like whack-a-moles, but often they stem from a failure to proactively identify and address the underlying negative consequences of the business on people. Therefore, focusing on managing your impact isn't just ethically sound, it's also strategically smarter risk management in the long run. How do you put this powerful idea into practice? The actionable takeaway here is to consciously shift your ethical lens, move from primarily asking, "What are the risks to us?" to fundamentally asking, "What is the impact by us?" Start by initiating a high-level human impact assessment within your leadership team. Ask these simple but profound questions. 1. Who are the main groups of people significantly affected by our core business model? Think employees, direct and indirect workers in the supply chain, customers using our products or services, communities where we operate. 2. Looking honestly at our operations and products, what are the top, say, 3 most significant ways we impact the well-being, dignity, or rights of these groups, considering both positive contributions and negative consequences? Use the answers to these questions as the primary filter for setting your ethical priorities, allocating resources for sustainability initiatives, and guiding strategic decisions. This impact-focused approach provides the true north, a stable anchor in the turbulent seas of modern business. Focusing on human impact provides a clear compass, a true north that makes intrinsic sense, but the practical challenges remain. How does this theoretical clarity translate into tangible actions, especially when it comes to building genuine stakeholder trust, not just managing perceptions and navigating the unavoidable political dimensions of business today? How do you embrace transparency, as Taylor advises, without it backfiring? How do you engage responsibly in the political sphere without fueling further polarization or being accused of hypocrisy? Higher Ground offers practical guidance on bridging this gap between principle and practice. First, Taylor argues that real trust isn't built through slick communication campaigns or reputation management consultancies. It's built through reciprocity and demonstrated reliability. This means genuinely engaging with stakeholders, especially those most impacted by your operations, not merely to deflect criticism or manage them, but to learn from their perspectives, acknowledge problems honestly, and demonstrate a consistent commitment to addressing the negative impacts you've identified. It's about showing fairness, respect, and follow-through, even when it's difficult. Taylor contrasts this authentic approach with examples like corporations sponsoring climate conferences while simultaneously lobbying against climate regulations, actions that erode trust rather than build it. Building trust is slow, painstaking work, grounded in consistent impact-aware behavior. Second, navigate the demands for transparency strategically. Taylor cautions against blind, indiscriminate transparency, which can be weaponized by opponents, overwhelm stakeholders with irrelevant data, or create internal paranoia. Instead, be strategically candid. Focus your transparency efforts on the areas where your business has the most material impact, those significant positive and negative effects you identified. Be proactively honest about the challenges you face in these areas, the steps you're taking, the progress you're making, and the inevitable setbacks. Companies like Uber and Google have released reports detailing safety incidents or content takedowns, acknowledging problems openly, even if imperfectly, can paradoxically build more credibility than glossy sustainability reports that only highlight successes. Honesty about imperfection fosters more genuine trust than a facade of perfection. Third, acknowledge and address corporate political responsibility. Pretending companies are apolitical actors is no longer credible. Taylor advises leaders to consciously align their political activities, including lobbying, campaign contributions, and trade association memberships, with their stated company values and their material human impacts. Ask, does our political spending contradict our public commitments on climate change, human rights, or fair labor? Prioritize using corporate influence not just for narrow self-interest, like securing tax breaks or deregulation that might exacerbate negative impacts, but for supporting functional systems essential for long-term stability. Things like democratic institutions, the rule of law, and level playing fields. Carefully consider the risks of hypocrisy when your political actions diverge sharply from your professed principles. Finally, and perhaps most fundamentally, Taylor stresses that building an ethical organization is less about policing individual bad apples and more about cultivating an ethical culture and designing ethical systems. This means moving beyond what she calls compliance theater, endless online training modules, and tick-box exercises. Instead, leaders must address the systemic drivers of unethical behavior, our performance incentives, inadvertently encouraging employees to cut corners or ignore risks to hit targets. Does the leadership team suffer from blind spots regarding certain ethical issues? Is there sufficient psychological safety for employees to raise concerns without fear of retaliation? Integrating ethical considerations into the how of doing business, recruitment, promotion, compensation, strategic planning is far more effective than treating ethics as a separate policing function. Think of the recurring scandals at companies like Wells Fargo, often rooted not just in individual misconduct, but in systemic pressures and cultural failures. So, how can you start putting these actionable altitudes into practice? Integrate your impact focus directly into your operations. Here are 3 concrete steps inspired by Higher Ground. 1. Initiate a review of your company's political spending and lobbying activities. Ask the hard question, does this activity genuinely align with our core values and our understanding of our most significant impacts? Start the process of bringing them into alignment. 2. Pick one specific area where your company faces a significant ethical or sustainability challenge, perhaps related to supply chain labor standards, product safety, or environmental footprint. Commit to practicing strategic candor in your next relevant report or communication, openly sharing. Start a conversation with your leadership team and managers. Are our internal incentive structures, performance targets, or unspoken cultural norms sometimes encouraging ethically questionable shortcuts to achieve business goals? Begin exploring how to better align performance expectations with ethical principles. These are not easy steps, but they are essential for reaching higher ground. Navigating the complexities of business ethics in today's hyper-transparent, politicized, and demanding world is undeniably challenging. The old playbooks are obsolete, and the ground feels constantly unsteady. But as we've explored through the lens of Alison Taylor's vital book, Higher Ground, there is a powerful way forward. We've seen why the traditional profit maximization model fails catastrophically in our current environment. We've uncovered why seemingly progressive approaches, like chasing ESG scores or vaguely promising to balance all stakeholder interests, can often be misleading traps, encouraging superficiality over substance. And most importantly, we've discovered Taylor's core insight: anchoring your ethical framework in a clear-eyed understanding of your company's real-world human impact provides the most reliable compass for navigation. This focus clarifies priorities and builds a foundation for genuine progress. From there, we learned that building trust requires authentic reciprocity, not just PR. Transparency must be strategic and candid about challenges. Political engagement demands responsibility and alignment with values, and ultimately, fostering a resilient ethical organization depends more on embedding ethics into the culture and systems than on mere compliance theater. The journey to higher ground isn't about achieving perfection overnight. It's about commitment, courage, and a willingness to ask difficult questions and make hard choices grounded in your impact. So what's the one insight from our discussion today that resonates most strongly with you? What's one small step you can take this week to begin applying it? Maybe it's initiating that first high-level conversation about your company's human impact. Perhaps it's starting the review of your political spending's alignment with your values. Or maybe it's simply fostering more open, psychologically safe conversations about ethical pressures and trade-offs within your own team. Whatever it is, taking that first step is crucial. To truly dive deeper into the nuanced arguments, compelling case studies, and detailed practical advice for implementing these principles, I highly encourage you to grab a copy of Alison Taylor's Higher Ground: How Business Can Do the Right Thing in a Turbulent World. You can find the Amazon link to purchase the book in the description of this podcast episode right below. Reading the full text will provide invaluable context and guidance as you lead your organization towards more ethical, resilient, and impactful future. Thank you for joining us on CEO's Library, the 1% Bookshelf. Until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and keep striving for higher ground.